So I got a great question here, and it's actually someone wants me to elaborate on some stuff. Um, could you elaborate more on your time out of body? Also, would you mind telling us your method for achieving an out of body experience? I've kind of gone over it before, but I will definitely go over the method again. And I'll go over that method in exactly the way I had my first one. Um, Years ago, I was performing at a Renaissance festival, actually technically a medieval fair in New Orleans, and I was flying in on the weekends to perform there. So I was hopping a flight, flying in, and then my comedy partner at the time was down there for the run. He had a tent set up, and I would fly in. They'd pick me up at the airport. I'd go back. I'd stay in his tent for the night, and I'd stay there for Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday evening or early Monday morning. I forget which was. They would take me to the airport, and I'd fly out and go back to work. And for some reason, during this time, New Orleans had a cold snap. But it was a cyclical cold snap because during the week it would warm up and be beautiful, and on the weekends it would be frigid cold. And I was only there on the weekends. And so I'd fly in, and I'd be in this tent, and I'd be cold in this tent all night. And in between the first and the second week, I was watching 60 Minutes on TV. And watching 60 Minutes, there was this really cool story about these monks, these Buddhist monks, who they would put cold, wet towels on them. And they would take them into a freezer, and they would meditate in the freezer. And they would raise their body temperature through meditation. And that would heat up these towels, and these towels were coming out, over 100 degrees and steaming. And these wet towels were now like hot coming out of a freezer. And I thought to myself, and this is an important thing I'm about to say, and I'll reiterate why in a second. I thought to myself, well, if they can do it, so can I. If they can do it, so can I. You see, one of the issues that a lot of people have when they're trying to attain spiritual experiences or going out of body or any of these situations is they get into the headspace about process, about that monk over there obviously has been studying for decades to get to the point where they can do that. That's not how it works. Everything in your life, everything in your world is about belief. Just knowing you can. So if they can do it, so can I. I just knew I could do it. I just knew I could, right? So here I was lying in that tent, and I decided that those monks, since they warmed themselves up, I'm going to warm myself up using their technique. Now, it didn't tell us their technique. I just decided I was going to warm my body up. So naturally what happened to me was lying there in that tent, my extremities were the most cold. My feet were freezing. So I started with my feet. And what I did was I just focused my attention on my feet. And once I really started feeling what my feet felt like in my attention, on my focus, I said, my feet are getting warm. And I could feel, because now my belief and my focus was there, my feet got warm. And they warmed up, and it was like, oh, they feel good. They feel great, right? Then I decided I am bringing that heat up into my ankles. And then the heat moved up into my ankles. And I'm bringing that heat up into my shins, and I moved it up into my shins. And this is not quick. This was I just took my time. I decided I was moving it upward. I felt it move upward. I experienced what it felt like that part being warm, and I kept going. The interesting thing about this is as you do this process, you stop thinking about your feet. The higher you get up your legs, you are so focused on the point of your body that you are focused on that everything below that you can't feel anymore. Everything below that is just not really even in your thought process because you're so focused on the very specific part of the body. And what's happening is, as I was, quote unquote, warming the body up, I was technically leaving that part of the body. And so I got up to my navel and finally got up to my chest. And I felt like this, tense pressure. I was like, because now I felt it come up to there, and I was like, oh, all right. And I was like, I'm going to go up into my face. I'm going to go up my face. It wasn't moving up into my face. It wasn't moving up into my face. And then I had what I call a thought voice. Sometimes I'll hear a voice, someone call my name or something, but usually what I get is like hearing somebody else's thought. And it's kind of a weird way to say it, but that's kind of how I get it. And what I heard was, relax into it. Most people, when they get to this point, and I talked about this in another video just recently, most people, when they get to this point, they get overwhelmed with, how do I get out? I have to get out. I have to push past this. I have to break free. I've got to power my way through this. And no, you don't. You do exactly the opposite. You relax into it. You let go. And when you get to that point, you let go. What happened to me, when I exhaled, I let go. All that heat energy rushed up into my face and right out the top of my head. And what was interesting was, the first night I did not have a quote-unquote out-of-body experience as much as I had what's known as a Kundalini rising. I had a brilliant flash of light and heat and energy, and I felt like energy was flying from me in all directions, and I was one with everything around me. And I had this beautiful, loving experience called what they call the Kundalini rising, right? So the next morning I was talking to my comedy partner, who was a long-time transcendental meditator. And I explained to him what I'd done and how I got there. He said, well, he explained to me I had a Kundalini rising. So I was, okay. At this point in my life, I was not deep into spirituality. I was just going through my life and living my life, and I saw this one thing on 60 Minutes about these monks. It wasn't that I was on a big quest at that point. In fact, this was the thing that put me on my quest to figure out my life and figure out what was going on originally. So the next night I'm back in that tent, and it's cold again. And I'm like, well, I know the secret now. I can just do that again. So I started that exact same process. Came all the way up, got to that space, and what happened was I heard the zipper of the tent open. And I opened my eyes and I watched my comedy partner step into the tent and step over top of me. And I looked at my own face. I looked directly at my own face. And the whole time I was having this experience, all I could hear was this noise. Hum. It's like the Om sound almost, right? And I instantly snapped back into my body, and I turned to my comedy partner and I said, I just watched you step in the tent, and I was over there. And his response was, oh, you're out of body. It happens to me all the time. He says, the cool thing is when you have the moments where your alarm's going off and you forget to take your arm and you think you're turning your alarm off, but you're only using your ethereal arm. Your arm is reaching over trying to touch it, but you can't touch it because you forgot to bring your arm with you. So that led me down a journey. I now know that if I did that technique, warm my feet up, slowly bring the warmth up, right, that eventually I get to this place. So I started practicing. Now, like with every other form of spiritual modality you deal with, practice is key. In meditation, you have to continually practice to get to the point where the quiet times last longer, right? And then it gets simple. Then it gets very, very simple. It's the same thing with this. You have to continue to practice the process. And so I was continuing to practice the process. I was very lucky at the time. I was working Renaissance festivals. The job that I had flying in to New Orleans, I ended that job the next year, and I went on the road full time performing. So I had a lot of time to really dive into some serious spirituality stuff, and so I was focused on it. And I would go out of body, and to give you two really interesting examples. When I would go out of body, I would always try to go somewhere and see something that I've never seen, and then come back and write it down so that I could verify I saw something that was there. And so I would go somewhere and I would write down, I see, on this one top of this shelf over here, I see something that, whatever. And I would write it down. So I was very accurate. It was very accurate. But the one that really stands out was I did the exact same technique. Warmed my feet up, slowly brought it up, relaxed into the feeling, let myself go. And I got out of body in Annapolis, Maryland. And I actually traveled to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, which is 2.5 hours away. When I say traveled, I flew. I had the experience of crossing the Chesapeake Bay and crossing the Delmarva Peninsula over the trees and the cities and coming to Rehoboth. Now, I took that 2.5 hour trip in less than 5 minutes. I was there. Probably less than a minute I was there. And I found myself at my friend Bo's house. And I was in the house. I was like, okay, what can I see here that I can verify with Bo is here? And I looked over, and Bo was asleep on his bed, there's like a little living room, there's a door, and the bedroom was right there, and you can see Bo asleep in his bed. And Bo and I had talked about the stuff that I was doing, so he was very aware. And I went into his room, and I looked at him. I said, well, I wonder, since I am out of body and he's asleep, I wonder if I can project a thought into his head and see if he'll say something to me to verify I did that. So I got myself into the space, and I said, all right, something weird. I need something so weird that if he said it, I'd know. So I started focusing on purple rhinoceros. And I'd say, purple rhinoceros, purple rhinoceros. I'm thinking, Bo, purple rhinoceros, purple rhinoceros, purple rhinoceros. And I'm just focusing on it, just projecting it towards Bo. Ended up going back to my camper in Maryland at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. And the next day I got up and I called Bo. And Bo answers the phone. He says, this is really weird you're calling me this morning. I said, why? He says, last night, man, I had a dream you were in my house and you just kept saying purple rhinoceros. And I was like, woohoo, right? So I obviously made a connection. At this point, I think it's only appropriate that I tell you guys, I have never taken a drug in my life. I have never smoked marijuana. I've never taken a psychedelic. I've never done any of that. Growing up at a beach resort, I did some alcohol. I drank some for a while. But at that point, when I was doing my spiritual quest, I had stopped all drinking with the exception of one comedy show that I did that required me to chug beer. And I hated beer, so I would chug the beer for the show. But I just don't like the taste of beer. So I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't into drugs. This was spiritual practice and spiritual method that I was using. So I had done that, and then I had that experience. And it was great. The very next night, I decided to go out and do something else and go out and I was doing these on a regular basis, practicing this technique on a regular basis. So the next night, I went through the exact same process. But something different happened. This time, I came into a pure white expanse. And that's the only way to say it. It's not a room. It's an expanse. There's no beginning or end of this room. It's just pure white. Everything felt unconditionally loving, and I felt like a child. I felt like I didn't know anything. I was like, whoa. And this man was standing there, and he looked at me, And he says, "You're not supposed to be here yet." And I remember a couple things. He was standing there. I've told this story before, and I've edited it, but I'm going to tell you this part because I think this part's really kind of beautiful and fun. He says, "You're not supposed to be here yet." And he turns, and these two women walk over and tickle me, like tickle my physical body, and snaps me back into the physical plane. But I love the moment of being tickled back in because I think it tells you that physical sensation that we're feeling in the physical plane changes things. But to bring me back in such a fun, loving way as to tickle me was, to me, beautiful. What's interesting to me about the whole experience is that my belief was I was going out of body, and I did. And I went out of body in this physical realm, and I went out of body in the next realm as well. Now, I did a lot of travel after that where I snapped into that place and came out of that place. It was during this time that my comedy partner and I created a website, which is now gone, and it had a forum on it. And my brother had put a weird, very strange message on there. It was like, I was there when young Hack was, and he listed all these things. And it was all stuff that happened to me as a child that he witnesses as my brother. But right in the middle of it, it said something really interesting. It said, "I was there when young Hack mysteriously floated above the bed sheets." And I had no idea what that was. Well, a couple of weeks after reading that, I was out to dinner with my brother. And I said, "What was that?" I said, "I got everything in there except for that, the floating above the bed sheets. What was that about?" He said, "Oh, you don't remember?" I said, "No." He says, "You were a little boy. You're very young." He says, "And you had a fever. You were very sick. And we were all there in the room with you and hanging out and making, because we were worried about you." And he says, "And all of a sudden you said, 'I'm taller than all of you. I'm on the ceiling. I'm up here.'" He says, then you started talking to somebody, and then a little while later your fever broke and you were fine." So he described an out-of-body experience with me as a child that I had no memory of. So I think it is very much in our innate nature to go out of body. And I think a child especially doesn't have all the preconceived notions and doubts and fears that we build into our psyche in the process of growing up in this physical place. I think the biggest key to getting out of your physical body is to relax into it, is to get into that space of just letting it be and knowing you can, and knowing that there's no limitation, and then choosing what it is you want. Choosing to say, "I am going out of body." Choosing, "I am warming my feet up. I am." And now, when I go out of body, now I lay down and I go, okay, my feet, my shins, my knees, my thighs, I come right up and I go right out. Because the more you practice, the better you get at it. But the key is not to get into your head about it. The key is to release your head. Release that and just go, okay, and breathe. Bring yourself up to the process, and then just breathe your way out. Don't get into, pardon me, don't get into feeling you have to push your way out, because you'll never get out. Because you're focusing on the struggle rather than just letting it happen. Just let it be. Make the conscious choice and then have faith. If you have faith that your conscious choice, then you don't need to fight it, because what you're actually fighting is your faith. So you guys have a great day, and I hope that helps answer your question. And I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.